Hi there, Dave here. Today I'm going to be building a gaming desktop computer. These are all the parts I'm going to be using, and I'll have a description of all these parts below this video. So let's get started. So the case we're using is a Corsair 300R case, and just take the side panel off so we can see inside. This uses thumb screws for the side panels, which makes it easier to take them off. So let's take a look inside. Here at the back we have an exhaust fan, and there's also a fan at the front of the case as well. Now inside the case we have plenty of room for a long graphics card and a large space for the motherboard, which will take ATX motherboards and micro ATX motherboards as well. Now in here we have 4 slots for hard drives, and here we have screws as well inside the box, and these ones will actually take normal 3.5-inch hard drives, and it has screw holes for solid state drives as well. And here at the front of the case we have 2 USB 3 ports, a microphone port and headphone port, and have a power on-off switch, reset switch, and a hard drive light as well. And just here we have the cables to connect up these front ports to the motherboard. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to put in is the DVD drive. Here I'm using a Samsung DVD drive, and I'm going to put it into this top slot here in the case. So I'll just put my hand behind the bracket and pop it out. Make sure the DVD drive is the right way up, and then slot it into place. This bracket here will click it into place, so you don't actually need to screw it into place. Next I'm going to install the first hard drive. This is a 2TB Western Digital hard drive, and I'm going to install it into this top bracket here. Now these brackets have little rivets at the sides, and those can be plugged into these screw holes on the hard drive, so there's no need to use screws on this one. And seeing as the bracket will be facing this way in the case, we want the connections of the hard drive to face the back of the case, so I'll be installing it into this bracket this way around with these SATA connections to face the back of the computer case. So I'll install the hard drive into the bracket now. That's it. And then slide the hard drive into the case. Next I'm going to install this solid state drive. This is a Sandisk Extreme 240GB drive, and I'm going to install it into this bracket here. And as I mentioned earlier, there's some screw holes in the bracket so that this solid state drive can be installed into the bracket like this. I'll show you a close-up of this. So now we have a close-up of this bracket, and you can clearly see the 4 screw holes for the solid state drive. And I've just taken this side metal piece out of the bracket to give room for the solid state drive to go on. Now the drive will will actually have these SATA connections facing the back of the bracket here. So let's turn it over and let's line up the screw holes. Now the screws that I'm using came with the case. Just make sure it's reasonably tight but not too tight. And there we have it in the bracket ready to go into the case. So now we can just pop in the solid state drive back into the case. Next we can put in the motherboard's I/O plate. This will go into the back of the case just here. I'll show you a close-up of this. So we want the I/O plate to be facing this way round. So just put it into the back of the case and just click it into place into this hole. So here we have the Asus Z87 Pro motherboard and an Intel Core i7 processor. This is a 3.5 GHz processor, unlocked, and here we have an Arctic Freezer i11 processor fan, and also 8 GB of memory by Corsair. So now we can install the processor into the motherboard. So I've just laid out some plain paper here on the table just to make sure it doesn't get any shorts on the back of the motherboard. Just carefully slide the motherboard out onto the plain paper. So I'll put these to one side for a minute. So I've just taken the processor out of its box, and in the processor box it does come with its own fan, which is also pre-pasted. I'm going to use this third-party fan. So I'm going to move this fan to one side, and now I'm going to put the processor into the motherboard. So to put the processor in, we want to push this metal lever down and out slightly, and we can lift this up like that. Now on the processor itself you can see there's two notches, a small notch there and one here, and these line up with the notches on the motherboard, so it should go in with no force. I'll just put the top down, pull the arm back down, and this plate just comes off. So this is the processor fan, and we need to put these two metal plates on here and here and screw them into place. And we can take this label off now. So the next part of installing the CPU fan is to put on the back plate onto the back of the motherboard. So just put it this way round and pop it into place. Next you need to hold the back plate on and turn the motherboard over. So I've got the back plate into place, and as you can see I've turned the motherboard back over. Next we need to remove the fan from this heatsink for the CPU cooler. Just simply unclip it take the fan off for now. Next we can put some paste on this part of the CPU cooler. Now this cooler came with some paste in a syringe, so we can do that now. So I've now put some paste on the bottom of the CPU cooler, and we can now put it on top of the processor. Now we want the fan, when it goes back on, to be on this side. So we can now put this down. We line these 4 parts up with the 4 holes here on the motherboard. So let's just line that up now. Now we can screw each of these 4 holes down here using these longer screws, and that's why I took the fan off earlier, so that we can get to these screw holes here. So I'm going to screw it into place now. So I've just finished putting in the 4 screws here for the CPU cooler, and I just screwed them until there was a bit of resistance. You don't want to screw them in too tightly. So now we can put on the fan. There's 2 clips either side of the fan. Let me just clip them into place. Just pull it over the side of the heatsink. And now we can put in the cable for the CPU fan, and this will go onto this port just here on the motherboard. So we just clip it into place. That's it. So now I'm going to put the memory in, and if you've got 2 sticks of memory on this particular motherboard, you can put them into the 2 gold slots here. So let's open up the first tab and just make sure the notch on the memory just here lines up with the notch on the motherboard here. So we just slot that into place. Just firmly press it down, and that's locked into place. The same with the second stick of memory. Just line up the notches again. And push it into place. Just make sure they've locked into place, and that's the memory done. So now I'm going to put the motherboard into the case, and we need to line up this motherboard I/O plate with the ports on the motherboard. Also, you have a locating pin here, and this will go through one of the holes in the motherboard. So I'm going to take the motherboard now, line it up with the I/O plate and the locating pin as well. So now I'm going to screw the motherboard down onto the case. All the screw holes are lined up, and there's 8 screw holes around the edge of the motherboard, and the screws I'm using are from the case screws, and that's the type of screw that I'm using there. So I'm just going to screw the motherboard down now. So I've just finished putting in all of the screws. I've just put each screw in lightly, and then afterwards I go around tightening the screws up, but you don't want to screw them too tightly. Just get them so that they're firmly pushing the motherboard into place. Now, one thing I forgot to mention before is that to get the motherboard in, I just removed this case fan at the back, and that made it much easier to put the motherboard into place. So now I've screwed the motherboard into the case, I'm going to put the case fan, the back case fan, back into place. Now all this needs is put it into place, line it up with the screw holes again, and it's just held in place by 4 screws. So now I'm going to untie these case cables here. Now these case cables need to be plugged into the motherboard, but to make this easier with this motherboard in particular, we have this. I'll show you a close-up of that. And this is for plugging in these case cables into this one, onto these pins here. And then once you've finished with that, you can plug this straight onto the motherboard. This makes it a bit easier doing it this way. So I'll show you a close-up of putting some of these onto these pins. So here we can see it says hard drive LED plus and minus, and here we have the hard drive LED case cable, and we can see on the back, you can just see that arrow that indicates the plus sign. So I turn it over, plug that into there, and you can do the same with the other case cables. So I've now got all the case cables plugged in like so, and now we can plug it into the motherboard. Now it only plugs in one way, so just plug it into here, and that's that part done. This cable that I'm holding here is a connector to connect up the USB 3 ports on the front of the case to the motherboard, and this cable will actually plug into this port here on the motherboard. Now it only goes in one way because it's keyed, so just plug that in now. And this connector here I'm holding is for the front case fan, and this plugs into the motherboard onto this connection here. Now it has 4 pins here, but the fan goes into 3 of the pins. As you can see, the connector uses up 3 of the pins, and those 3 pins are the ones that are nearest the edge of the motherboard, leaving this 4th pin still exposed. Now I'm going to plug in the back case fan. Again, it uses 3 pins on the motherboard, leaving one of the pins exposed, as you can see here. So now I'm going to put the graphics card in. So I can take off this protector here. And the protectors just here can come off. And has a plastic sheet. I can take that off now. Okay, so I'm going to put it into this slot here on the motherboard. So to do this, I'll need to take out 2 of the side brackets, which is the 2nd and 3rd from top. That's one of the brackets out. On most graphics cards you only need to remove one of these brackets, but because this particular graphics card takes up 2 slots, I need to remove the 2 brackets. So I'll just install the graphics card into the second PCI slot. Just gently rock it into place. That's it. Now we can screw it into place on the side of the computer case there. So now I'm going to install the sound card. Now you don't have to install the sound card because the motherboard already has its onboard sound, but this is just a preference because dedicated sound from a sound card always sounds better. Okay, so I've taken out the bracket that's second from the bottom. I'm just going to install the sound card into this PCI Express slot here. That's it. Now I just need to screw the bracket back into place. Now I'm going to put the power supply into the bottom of the case here. Now this case at the bottom has a dust filter to keep out the dust and fluff from the power supply. So just slot that back in. So I'm going to have the power supply's fan facing downwards. I'll turn it this way and put it into the power supply slot there. I'll just slide it up to the back of the case, and there's just 4 screws which secures this power supply into place. So I've got the power supply screwed into place now. I actually used the case screws for this, and connected to the power supply is this 24-pin power connector which connects on the motherboard just up here, and to help power the processor we have an 8-pin power connector which will connect up the top of the motherboard just up here. I'll show you a close-up of these. So as you can see on this 24-pin power connector, it has a clip on the side which will be clipped in here on this right side. So we just plug that straight in. This 8-pin power connector has a clip as well, as you can see on the side there, and that goes onto the bottom. So just plug it in here on the motherboard. So connected to the power supply is these SATA connectors. I'll be using those for the 2 hard drives down here at the bottom. So to power up the 2 SATA hard drives, the normal hard drive and the solid state drive, we need to take off the back panel and feed through the SATA power connector that's connected to the power supply, and then we can connect these SATA power connectors onto the two hard drives here. So here I have two SATA data cables, and one side has the 90-degree angle and the other side is straight, and the same with the other cable. So I'm going to put the 90-degree angled part of the cable into the back of the solid state drive, and the other end will feed through into the motherboard. Same again with the second cable, this time into the 2TB hard drive. We can feed these cables back through here or here and connect it into the motherboard. So now we can put the back side of the case back on. Screw it into place. The other end of the two SATA data cables goes into the top two yellow ports, the SATA ports on the motherboard. So next I have a cable, and you can see these two ends. This is for DVD drive to power it up. This end goes into the back of the DVD drive, and this end of the cable goes into the back of the power supply. So the last cables to put in are these two cables. These cables are to power up the graphics card. The blue ends of these cables will go into the back of the power supply, and the black ends will go into the graphics card. On this side of the power cables we have two 8-pin power connectors that can be both split into 6. And on the graphics card we need an 8-pin power connector and a 6-pin one. So on the first one we'll keep it as 8-pin, put the clip on the bottom side, plug it into here. And on the second one we can move those other two power connectors away and plug it into the 6-pin on the graphics card. Now, just to finish this off, I have some cable ties here, so I can tidy up some of these cables inside the case. So I'm just going to do that now. So that just leaves putting the side of the case back on, and the 2 screws as well. And that's this computer completed. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching. See you next time.